You have almost certainly witnessed the footage by now. A restaurant worker in a moment of total disregard, tossing food onto the ground while a camera captures every second of the act. Within a few hours, that clip travels across every social media platform, reaching millions of screens. It is shocking. It is repulsive. It creates an immediate and justified wave of public anger. However, there is a much deeper and more uncomfortable truth that the video does not show. That viral moment is not the real problem facing the industry. It is merely the exact point in time when the public finally stopped giving restaurants the benefit of the doubt. For many decades, the act of eating out in the United States was not a decision that required heavy thought. It was a routine part of life, a way to relax, a way to connect with friends, or simply a way to avoid the stress of cooking after a long and exhausting day. But somewhere along the path, that simple habit quietly transformed into a stressful financial calculation. This change did not happen because individuals suddenly became cheap or greedy. It happened because the entire equation of value has broken down. Prices continued to climb toward the ceiling. Portions began to shrink. The quality of ingredients slipped. Service became hit or miss. And then came the specific part that pushed many people over the edge. The bill, extra charges that no one saw coming. Service fees added on top of tips. Digital screens demanding a 20% tip before a single word was even spoken to a human being. What used to feel like genuine hospitality now feels like a calculated checkout trap. This is not just a story about inflation or the rising cost of goods. It is a story about the total collapse of trust. When a customer feels surprised, pressured, or nickel and dimed, they do not usually stand up and complain loudly. They simply choose to never come back. That quiet disappearance of the regular guest is far more dangerous to a business than any single viral scandal. By the end of this discussion, you will understand why even people who have the money to eat out are choosing to stay home. You will see why restaurants are not losing their customers in a single night, but are instead slowly bleeding them away until nothing is left. Every few weeks, a new restaurant scandal explodes across our social media feeds. A kitchen is caught violating the most basic rules of sanitation. A staff member is seen handling food in ways that no customer should ever have to imagine. These clips feel so shocking and so disgusting that they gather millions of views almost instantly. On the surface, it looks like these specific moments are what drive people away from the dining room. But they are not the root cause of the decline. They are the red warning lights flashing on a dashboard that has been ignored for too long. These videos go viral, not because restaurant hygiene suddenly failed overnight, but because they confirm a dark suspicion that many customers already have in their minds. People do not watch these clips and think this is a one-time mistake. They think this could be happening in any kitchen in the country. Once that thought takes hold of the public mind, trust begins to erode at an incredible speed. Restaurants rely on a very fragile social contract. The customer cannot see the inner workings of the kitchen. They cannot verify how the food is stored, how it is handled, or how it is prepared. They must rely entirely on faith. They trust that standards are being followed even when the doors are closed and no one is watching. When that trust is shaken in such a public way, even in just one location, the damage spills over to the entire industry. What makes this current moment different from the scandals of the past is the timing. These clips are not appearing when people feel excited or happy about dining out. They are appearing when customers already feel overcharged, underwhelmed, and taken for granted by the businesses they support. The scandal does not create the dissatisfaction. It merely validates the feeling that has been growing for years. And here is the key detail that many experts miss. Most people do not actually stop going to restaurants because of hygiene fears alone. If that were the case, the fast food industry would have vanished decades ago. What really changes the behavior of a customer is the emotional calculation that follows the shock. When someone sees a viral clip and realizes they are paying premium prices for that level of care, the value equation collapses instantly. Even the restaurants that run clean and professional kitchens still suffer from this fallout because, from the perspective of the customer, the risk now feels too high. In the best-case scenario, you get a decent meal. In the worst case, you pay a high price for something you regret the moment it reaches the table, or worse, the moment you see the final bill. So when dining rooms sit empty, it is not because one video scared everyone away. It is because those videos arrive at a moment when customers are already asking themselves if eating out is worth the trouble at all. This brings us to the real turning point in the story. Because even if a restaurant is spotless, friendly, and well managed, there is one specific place where almost everyone decides whether they will ever return: the bill. For most individuals, the decision to stop eating out does not happen in a single moment of anger. It happens slowly, one underwhelming meal at a time. The food is not necessarily terrible, but it is certainly not memorable. The portions feel noticeably smaller than they used to be just a few years ago. The bill feels much heavier than expected, and when that experience repeats itself, something inside the customer quietly breaks. Even as overall inflation has begun to cool down in other parts of the economy, the cost of eating out has not followed that trend. Prices at restaurants continue to climb every single year, and much of the recent revenue growth in the industry has come from charging more money, not from serving more people. The dining rooms are not getting busier. They are just getting more expensive for those who still show up. This shift has fundamentally changed how the average customer thinks. A mid-tier sit-down restaurant used to feel like a reasonable treat for a hard week of work. Today, it often feels like a high-stakes gamble. Two people can walk into a building and order a modest meal while skipping dessert and alcohol, yet still leave having spent $60 or more. If you add appetizers or a few drinks, that number climbs so fast that it becomes a burden. For many households, this is no longer seen as casual spending. It is a deliberate and difficult choice. The frustration is not just about the higher prices themselves. It is about what those prices now deliver to the table. Customers are increasingly vocal about food that tastes like it was reheated, menus that feel exactly the same in every city, and dishes that no longer justify the high premium. When people start comparing a restaurant meal to what they can prepare in their own kitchen and realize the home version is cheaper and better, the restaurant loses its only advantage. This is especially true in a market where information travels at the speed of light. Social media is filled with side-by-side comparisons, receipt breakdowns, and honest reactions from real people. The old assumption that customers would not notice a gradual decline in portion size or quality no longer holds any weight. Every single change is documented, shared, and judged by the public. What is emerging is a very clear pattern. People are not boycotting restaurants out of a sense of principle. They are simply optimizing their spending to survive. If a meal feels overpriced but still delivers a great experience, many will still pay. But when the price rises and the experience stays the same or declines, the customer recalibrates their life. That recalibration explains why so many people now say they only eat out for very special occasions. Eating out has shifted from a common habit to a major event. And once that shift happens, the frequency of visits drops faster than the industry can handle. This is the backdrop for everything that comes next. Because as painful as higher menu prices are, they are at least visible to the eye. A customer can see them before they place an order. The real breaking point, the moment of true betrayal, comes after the plates have been cleared and the check arrives. For many customers, the moment they decide never to return is not during the meal. It is when the bill hits the table. The menu price may already feel high, but that is not what triggers the real anger. What breaks the trust is discovering that the number you thought you were paying was never the real number at all. Service fees, wellness charges, credit card surcharges, mandatory gratuities for small groups, takeout container fees, and sometimes even fees for tap water. Each one is small on its own, but together they create a powerful sense of being ambushed at the checkout. Psychologically, this matters far more than many restaurant owners realize. A customer is much more willing to pay a higher price upfront than they are to accept surprise add-ons at the end of the night. When the final total is higher than expected, it feels deceptive, even if every fee is technically written in small print somewhere on the menu or a wall. This is why the backlash against hidden fees has grown so quickly and so loudly. It is not about the money alone. It is about the violation of expectations. People walk into a restaurant believing they understand the transaction, and when that understanding turns out to be incomplete, the relationship fractures. Lawmakers have begun to notice this public reaction. In California, new pricing transparency rules were introduced to stop the practice of advertising a low price and revealing mandatory charges only at the end. While restaurants are not always banned from adding these charges, they are increasingly required to display them clearly and conspicuously. That distinction is vital. The issue is not necessarily whether the fees exist. It is whether the customer feels tricked by them. And that sense of being tricked lingers long after the meal is over. Once someone experiences that shock at the checkout, it colors every future decision they make. They start scanning menus with a defensive attitude. They ask the servers awkward and difficult questions, or they simply avoid sit-down restaurants altogether. What makes this even more damaging is how these fees interact with already rising menu prices. Customers do not separate the two in their minds, they see a single outcome. They are paying significantly more than they expected for an experience that did not feel special. Over time, that creates a powerful and negative association. Restaurants now equal financial stress. Even worse, these fees rarely achieve their intended purpose of saving the business. Instead of quietly offsetting the costs, they become the focal points of public resentment. People post their receipts online. They compare notes with others. They warn their friends to stay away. A practice meant to preserve a small profit margin ends up eroding the loyalty that a business needs to survive in the long run. At this stage, many customers have not even reached the tipping screen yet. And that is where the emotional pressure intensifies even further. Because once fees are added automatically to the bill, the question becomes painfully obvious to the guest. What exactly am I tipping for now? This question leads directly into the most divisive and heated issue in modern dining, which is the tipping culture backlash. Tipping used to be a simple response to good service and a job well done. Today, for many customers, it feels more like a moral test that they are forced to take. The moment the digital tablet flips around to face the guest, the pressure begins. 18%, 20%, or 25%. Sometimes this happens before a single word has even been spoken to a server. Sometimes it happens when the entire order was placed through a cold screen. What was once a discretionary choice now feels like an expected debt. And that shift has fundamentally changed how people experience the act of dining out. The backlash is not about a refusal to tip the staff. It is about the growing sense that tipping has lost its connection to the actual service provided. Customers are being asked to subsidize the wages of the staff in situations where service is minimal or non-existent, while also absorbing higher menu prices and additional fees. That combination creates deep resentment rather than a spirit of generosity. At the same time, the servers are caught in the middle of a war they did not start. Many are paid hourly wages that have not kept pace with the rising cost of living, making tips essential for their very survival. From their perspective, the fatigue of the customer threatens their livelihood and their future. From the perspective of the customer, being told that they should not go out if they cannot afford to tip feels like being priced out twice. Once by the menu, and again by the social pressure of the culture. This tension is exactly what makes the current model so unstable. Tipping now places the customer and the worker on opposite sides of a problem that neither of them created. The responsibility for fair compensation has been quietly shifted away from the ownership and onto social norms where conflict is inevitable. As this pressure builds, the behavior of the public changes. Some customers tip less often. Others tip with a sense of bitterness. Many simply reduce how often they choose to go out at all. Even people who have always tipped well describe feeling exhausted by the constant prompts, the judgment, and the lack of clarity about where their money actually goes. What is especially damaging is how tipping intersects with mandatory service charges. When a fee is already added to the bill, customers naturally assume it supports the staff. When they are then asked to tip on top of that, confusion turns into pure frustration. Transparency disappears and the trust erodes even further. Ironically, this backlash does not help the workers in the long run. As the frequency of dining drops, the tip pools begin to shrink. Fewer shifts are available for the staff. Earnings become less predictable and more volatile. The system begins to feed on itself. And while the customers and the servers argue online about who owes what, a much quieter and more permanent change is happening behind the scenes. Restaurants are looking for new ways to cut their costs altogether. And that is where the experience begins to unravel even faster. As pressure mounts from every possible direction, many restaurants have turned to aggressive cost-cutting just to stay afloat for another month. On a spreadsheet in a corporate office, the logic makes perfect sense. Labor is the most expensive part of the business. The profit margins are very thin. Something has to give way. In practice, what gives way is often the quality of the experience itself. Customers are noticing fewer staff members on the floor, longer wait times for their food, and service that feels rushed or totally disengaged. Tables sit unclean for long periods. Orders get mixed up more frequently. Guests wait 15 minutes without even being acknowledged by a human and then quietly walk out of the door. These moments rarely end in a loud confrontation. People do not usually make a scene. They simply decide right then and there not to come back. Behind the scenes, the workers are feeling the extreme strain as well. In some places, credit card processing fees are now being deducted directly from the tips of the servers. Elsewhere, restaurants are experimenting with outsourcing parts of the customer interaction entirely, replacing in-person roles with remote order taking or automated systems. Each move may shave a few cents off the costs, but it also removes another vital layer of human connection. This is where the downward spiral accelerates. Reduced staffing leads to poorer service. Poorer service leads to fewer customers. Fewer customers increase the pressure to cut the costs even further. What starts as a temporary strategy for survival becomes a permanent erosion of the value of the brand. From the point of view of the customer, the shift is subtle, but it is unmistakable. Dining out feels colder, more transactional, and far less welcoming than it was in the past. The small touches that once justified the high price, such as attentive service, a sense of being cared for, and a smooth experience, are increasingly absent from the room. When those things disappear, restaurants lose the very thing that differentiates them from cooking a meal at home. What is most damaging is that these changes often go unnoticed by the management until it is far too late to fix them. The revenue might hold steady for a while because the prices are higher, masking the loss of repeat customers. But loyalty does not vanish all at once in a loud bang. It fades quietly, visit by visit, until the room is empty. And while independent restaurants struggle visibly, the large chains have the resources to survive much longer. Yet, that does not mean they understand the problem any better than the small owners. In fact, some of the most striking examples of this disconnect come from the biggest players in the world. And that brings us to the moment when frustration finally turns into a massive backlash. When frustration finally boils over, it often does so through the very moments that were meant to look positive to the public. A viral feel-good clip, a corporate response framed as an act of appreciation, or a public relations effort designed to signal that a company truly cares. And yet, instead of repairing the trust, these moments frequently make the situation much worse. What they expose is not malice or evil intent, but a total disconnect from reality. Large restaurant chains operate far away from the dining rooms where customers feel the direct impact of rising prices and shrinking value. Decisions are made in boardrooms guided by spreadsheets and optics, not by the lived experience of the person sitting at the table. So when a company responds to widespread dissatisfaction with a symbolic gesture rather than a structural fix, the gap becomes painfully obvious to everyone. Customers notice when more effort is spent on the presentation of an idea instead of the substance of the service. Flying executives across the country to stage public acknowledgments and creating moments meant for social media can easily cost more than the reward being celebrated. When that happens, the message received by the public is not one of gratitude. It is that the resources exist, but the priorities are completely misaligned with the needs of the people. The employees feel this deeply as well. Many workers are struggling with unpredictable schedules, tip volatility, and the rising cost of living in their own cities. Watching corporate leadership celebrate minor payouts or surface-level recognition can feel insulting when the underlying issues of pay and respect remain untouched. In those moments, morale does not improve. It erodes. What makes these missteps especially damaging is the timing of their arrival. They arrive in an environment that is already defined by extreme skepticism. Customers are paying more than they ever have before. They are navigating hidden fees, tipping pressure, and inconsistent service every time they go out. The workers feel squeezed from both sides of the counter. In that context, anything that looks performative or fake is immediately questioned and attacked. And once the public perception shifts against a brand, it is incredibly hard to recover. Social media amplifies tone-deaf moments much faster than it ever celebrates positive ones. The comment sections fill with comparisons, calculations, and harsh criticism. A single clip becomes the shorthand for a much larger narrative. That narrative is that the industry is completely out of touch with the people it depends on for survival. The irony is that the fix is not complicated or mysterious. Customers are not asking for a grand spectacle. Workers are not asking for viral praise. Both groups are simply asking for fairness, transparency, and a basic level of respect. When companies address those basics with clear pricing, honest communication, and meaningful investment in their own staff, trust has the room it needs to rebuild. When they do not do these things, even the most well-intentioned gestures can actually accelerate the backlash. When you step back and look at the entire pattern, the decline in dining out does not feel mysterious or confusing anymore. People did not suddenly stop enjoying the experience of a restaurant. They stopped feeling good about the transaction itself. Rising menu prices set the stage for this drama, but they were not the final breaking point. The real damage came from everything that was layered on top of those prices. The declining value, the surprise charges, the tipping fatigue, and the aggressive cost-cutting that stripped away the very experience people were paying for in the first place. Restaurant hidden fees did not just increase the totals on the bills. They broke the trust of the nation. And as the cost of eating out in the United States continues to rise without an increase in quality, many customers have quietly recalculated their lives and changed their habits forever. What is happening now is not a sudden collapse of the industry. It is a massive reset. The industry is being forced to confront a very simple and hard truth. Loyalty is not automatic anymore. It is not something you get just for being open. It has to be earned with every single visit and every single plate. The restaurants that survive this difficult moment will not be the ones with the flashiest marketing campaigns or the loudest messaging on social media. They will be the ones that choose to price their food honestly, respect both their customers and their staff, and deliver experiences that feel worth the hard-earned money of the guest. Because in the end, people are not walking away out of a sense of anger. They are walking away because they no longer see the value in the deal. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture of the economy, subscribe so you do not keep paying for experiences that quietly stopped being worth it a long time ago.